Hey everyone, and welcome to the Where the Hell Do We Go From Here podcast, where we try to figure out faith, identity, and life one existential crisis at a time. My name is Kevin, and today I have my good friend here, Cade. Do you want to introduce yourself, Cade?
Yeah, my name is Cade. I run the podcast Intrinsically Ordered, and my main channel is Gay X Trad. I was raised not religious, or particularly religious, became super Catholic, tried to become a cloistered Catholic monk, eventually deconverted after realizing there was no good reason to not be gay, and since then have kind of rebuilt my life and now try to be an influencer, I guess, as cringe as that sounds.
There you go. There you go. Awesome. So today we are going to be talking about meaning. What is meaning? Why is it important? What does meaning look like before and after deconstructing religion and anything in between? So just to start us out, hey, do you just want to talk a little bit about your perspective on what is meaning? Why is it important? How your views have changed? Anything that you think would be relevant?
Yeah, so we could maybe start with the dichotomy that a lot of religious people set up, which is on one hand, you have religion. God has created this world. God has willed this world into existence. He's communicated with us through a particular book. And when we live in accordance to that set of rules from this particular God, our lives are joyful. They might not be easy, but like we feel this sense of peace that what we do matters. We're getting to heaven. We're trying to bring as many people with us. And God gives us these rules to make us happy and help us be saved. And then the religious person says, so it's either that, or it's without God, without intrinsic things being intrinsically meaningful, without this religious dogma, your life's going to be meaningless. Nothing that you do matters. You're going to be walloping. You're going to be hedonistic. You are going to just be struggling to fill this God-sized hole in your heart. Seems to be the dichotomy that a lot of religious people, as they're questioning, are like, I want to keep the meaning and I don't want to become a complete heathen, so maybe I'll just stick to the religious in the meantime. And I feel like that's the dichotomy that's at least implicitly set up inside of Christian communities.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Would you say that, for example, something that I've heard is what gives us meaning is living in the purpose that God has for our life? And that reminded me of what you're saying, that God ordained this is what humanity is for. This is our purpose. Would you say that at least in Christian or religious circles, it seems to be our meaning is tied to what the purpose for our existence is, which is intrinsically tied to what God intended our purpose to be?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it. And a lot of times, especially Catholics, will give the analogy of like sports where there's the rules to the game, and they'll say like the rules to the game aren't there as like these arbitrary things, but when we stick inside of the rules and do our best to do them, we can play this brilliant, fun game. Like soccer wouldn't be fun if everybody was making up their own rules. But what makes soccer fun is that we're all under the same set of rules, but then we can excel. And that's kind of like, that's also how Catholics then justify hating gay people, but that's like a different rabbit hole. But that like the rules are there to help us, and God has made this like maze that's out there and we're following the map. Or like life is like a road trip and God has given us the map and there's some amazing destinations. And as long as we stick to that map, we're going to be good. And the vacation is going to be smooth sailing. Might not be easy. Like we might have to sacrifice, but like the journey will be worth it if we stick to that rule book.
That makes sense. That totally makes sense. Why would you say that? What do you think makes meaning important in general, just as like a human, like just humans' innate need for meaning or making meaning out of things? Do you think that's important? And if so, why?
Yeah, I think in psychology, if we're to take like the evolutionary approach, is like we're programmed to survive as a species. And I think people get that wrong, that like, why would people ever sacrifice or do hard things if it was only about our individual survival? But like as a species, we make sacrifices for the species to continue. And so when you're talking to somebody who's super religious and they're talking to you, and it might seem like they're saying actually like hateful things, but in their mind, they're like, I'm protecting you like from hell, because I don't want a fellow member of my species to like go to hell. I want them to have the best possible thing. And if God has given us this rule book, by enforcing it on other people, even when they don't want to, I'm helping our species survive. And there's that evolutionary instinct to continue and to reproduce that I think is apparent in the species, that I think isn't a terrible impetus or like a direction to go. But I think the central problem with, let's say, a religious view of meaning is that human goodness is so obfuscated by these like vestigial stories and structures that we don't end up making a better world by following this rule book. For example, in both of our lives, when it comes to homosexuality, to like ground this in something, is like, so God says, God has this wonderful plan for your sexuality, so the religious person would say. And like, even though it might not be apparent, if I'm hating you, Kevin, by trying to take away your rights, what I'm really trying to do is like a greater good that I know that is out there. And anytime like you're like, hey, gay marriage like doesn't harm people, actually people not feeling safe in their own communities always leads to harm, in that giving people rights to live lives that don't hurt other people but only make their lives better. And I think there's a good case to be made that society is made better by queer identity. We can't just look at the facts when we have the Bible in front of us. Because if you take a non-religious viewpoint to the issue of gay marriage, and if we all agree like, hey, we want a better world, gay marriage is absolutely a part of it. But when we go, oh, but God gave us this rule book, now all of a sudden we're not looking at the data points, we're looking at dogma. We're trying to filter through all of this goodness that's in front of us, but we're obfuscating it, and we're cutting off data points by going like, we have to keep this quote unquote biblical lens on, which I don't think the Bible says to begin with, but that's what the religious person's doing. And so we can't have honest and open conversations about making our lives better when we have to filter that through a dogmatic lens.
Yeah, that resonates so much because I remember when I was like very deep in like my Christian circles, one of the biggest things was, well, actually one of the things that they would tell us when they asked us to like go evangelize to people was, imagine if someone that you love has cancer and like you have the solution, you have the thing that's gonna like cure that cancer. How much do you have to hate them to not give them that cure? And in the same mindset, when it comes to preaching against things like homosexuality or any of these issues, in a way, it's like, I'm doing this because I'm trying to save you. Like, I'm trying to save you from hell. I'm trying to save you from an eternal separation from God. So in their minds, this is the loving thing to do. This is the right thing to do. This is, and tying this back to what we were talking about, this is in alignment with the purpose that God has given to me. Therefore, it is part of my meaning. My purpose in life is to be a follower of Jesus, to lead other people to him, to be like him, to know him and to make him known, right? And the ways that I can make him known is by communicating these truths that at the end of the day are based on a faulty foundation. And I think that's where tying that back to what you were saying, that you can see like these data points, like more objectively, like these queer identity or providing safe spaces or giving these people rights are helpful and produce like a more human flourishing, produce a better society, a more cohesive society. However, it does not align with, as you said, the vestigial kind of teachings that don't allow that kind of morality or sense of meaning or purpose to evolve. And I think that's when a lot of like the issues come into play, because it could be like the best thing in the world, right? It could actually, you could show someone like these are scientifically proven, like these are scientific studies that show that if you do this what's going to happen. Sure. But it's not a matter of that. Like, sure, that'll work if you're trying to defend a position that you already hold. But if it's someone trying to change your mind, if you show that to them, they're going to say at the end of the day, it's not really about the data points. It's not really about what we can see on the material. It's about the spiritual. And that is something that you can't see and something that you can't prove. Therefore, you can't say that I'm wrong. And there's no way for me to disprove that you're wrong because there's no way to test that, you know? And so what you were saying really reminded me of that. And at least that was my experience.
And then there's meaning both on the macro level, let's say from like a societal viewpoint, which is like society makes determinations, there's all these normative paths, there's these value schemas. But I think like the more pressing issue when talking to somebody, both as they become religious and as they're starting to deconstruct away from fundamentalism, is this idea like, how is there meaning without God? And
Mm.
so the question becomes like, what is the meaning of life? And I find it interesting when I ask that question to people, how they take that question to mean. I mean, it's not apparent when you say, like, what's the meaning of life? Some people answer like this ontological or this philosophical thing. Sometimes they'll answer in this like interpersonal way that makes their lives better. And so I think the question, if somebody asks me, is like, what's the meaning of life? Especially if they mean it like, what's the meaning of life without God? I tend to say like, what's the question asking? Right? Because when people ask that question, it's not a truth claim. It's not like, what are the taxonomy of seahorses in some library somewhere? I think what the question is when it comes to what is the meaning of life is, how is it that I want to live life to experience a meaning? Like, I like to flip the question to say, like, what they're really asking is, I want to have a meaningful life. And I find that a much better question to answer because you have access to the tests around that. But if you say, like, the meaning of life is blank, objectively, like, we don't have access to that. But what do people do to report a meaningful life, I think, is the juicier question. And as people are deconstructing, I think there's some things that we can talk about when it comes to like, how do you have purpose? How do you have meaning when it's not imbued from the creator?
Mm. Hmm. And with that, I would say I think that's a very interesting and probably like a difficult shift to go from there is this kind of objective meaning to meaning can be more subjective in the sense of how can I live my life in a way that is meaningful? What can I do to create that meaning? And I think when people ask that question, what is the meaning of life? Especially people who are deconstructing, can take that objective framework of their like God's purpose, God's meaning, that's the ultimate meaning, and trying to find that outside of religion and outside of their belief system, which I think is pretty hard to do. I don't even know. Yeah. Cause like if you have a belief system that is telling you this is the objective meaning, and you're trying to find that out outside of that religion, it's like you're carrying this framework that in itself is, again, faulty and it's based on assumptions, and you're trying, or like unproven assumptions that you can't really test, assumptions that there's no like there's not like good evidence for, and you're trying to apply that same framework and perspective and worldview into a world that is not as black and white as religion makes it seem. And I think that's where the discrepancy lies. At least that for me, it took me going from what is the objective meaning of life to how can I live a meaningful life, as you said. And I think that's a very interesting point to note that I hadn't necessarily thought about until like you were talking about it, and I sort of voiced that out.
And I think another step when people are especially looking to leave religion and they go like, what if life had no meaning? My first response is, I think I've built a meaningful life, but I like to stop because there's a lot of emotions when somebody hears the term life has no meaning, let's say, and they have this emotional reaction. What I like to first do is to just sit in that. Like, let's entertain the hypothetical of what if life didn't have objective meaning. And people are so afraid of that because they think what's going to happen from it. But what if we took a discussion for a second and said, like, what if life had no meaning?
Mm.
You sit with that, and then you go, so then what would I do? And another point that I like to bring up in this discussion is like, when things aren't objectively meaningful, we get to decide what things we care about. Because I think meaning has this connotation that the stars have been aligned in such a way that if we just read the stars, we'll have a map to our end destination. And that God has said, these things are important and these things are not. I like the question to be more about, what is it that we care about? Because if there isn't meaning out there, we get to decide, who in our lives do we want to care about? just because God said, or there might not be a God who might not have said that your mom is meaningful, doesn't mean you can't care about your mom if the
Right.
universe doesn't have no meaning. Or when it comes to human flourishing in a better future, what if that wasn't meaningful? What if that's something we cared about? What if the activities that we do on a daily basis, we do because we decided to care? What if the people in our lives that we care about, we decided to care about them? And what if everything that we negotiated, everything that we chose, we get to choose, and we get to choose that? And I think that makes life beautiful when we go, I love my parents, I love my friends, I love people because I decided to. Not because God said that I had to love people. What if I loved people because I care? Not because God said you have to care or else you're going to hell. Which is the same question of like, oh, without God, there's no morality. And it's like, how sad is it that you think how sad is it where you'd say like, oh, you might kill people without God? It's like, no, even without God, I care about people. I care about things. I care about a better future. And so I think also in this discussion to like release ourselves from like the philosophical thing of what is the meaning of life, to go like, what is it that I want to do to make my life meaningful? I think the even more narrow question, especially as you're leaving, is to go, what is it that I care about?
And I'm gonna bring this back to a point that you were saying earlier about like evolutionary psychology, and that's something that I was really contemplating as I was during my deconstruction process, is that the term meaning is something so uniquely human of figuring out what is the meaning of. I mean, I haven't studied this in depth. I don't know if like other animals have the capability of like understanding meaning or whatever, but what I know so far is that meaning is a very human thing to explore and to question and to navigate through. And I don't think it can be separated from the context in which it evolved. And the context in which it evolved was that kind of like sense and need of understanding and relating to, as you said, like care and love and compassion and all of these things. I think intrinsically to meaning is the human experience. And I think what religion has done throughout millennia is take these things, like what you're saying, what do you value, what is important, what do you care about, and make a decision as to what you care about, and then say that that's what God said, and then it becomes more institutionalized, then it becomes objective reality because it's what objective meaning is, is what God said. But at the end of the day, it's simply a reflection of humans grappling with what they value and what is important and what they care about. And then through the process of time and whatever, taking that into like more of a religion and establishing it as an objective truth. But at the end of the day, if we're granting that God wasn't the one who stated these things, it really is just a representation of human communities wrestling through what they value and institutionalizing that into a set of values on which to like adhere to and to live by. And I think meaning and morality are very interlinked and have a very dependent on each other and have a very strong relationship. But I think that I just don't think that meaning and purpose can be tied, can be stripped away from the context in which it evolved again. And I think that when we do that, it brings up this kind of discrepancy between, I was taught that there is an objective meaning, that there is an objective purpose, and now I'm deconstructing, and now there isn't. Like, oh, how am I going to live my life? Like, what? There is no objective. There may be no objective meaning. Like, there might not be something or a greater, like, higher power indicating what matters and what doesn't. And that's a very scary thought. And it's a very scary feeling if you grew up, and even if you didn't grow up with this, I think it's just part of the human experience. Like, why? Those are the fundamental questions. Like, why are we here? What's the purpose of us being here? How can we live a life that like what matters, and how can we live a life that aligns with what matters? And I think it is a very complicated question. But I do think that in the process of deconstruction, one of the most important things is what you just said right now, and being able to evaluate, what do I care about? How do my actions affect other people? How do my actions affect myself? And sort of crafting that meaning, crafting that purpose. What is the end point? What is your vision? How do you want to get there?
And I
It's
think,
not easy,
yeah,
but yeah.
I think in Christian circles that so much of the meaning question relies on putting what we could experience on earth into heaven. And what I mean by that is like anything that you're shortchanged on earth, any sacrifice that you make, or even any injustice that's suffered here can be made up for in heaven. And then in a certain sense, the meaning of life, as a very Catholic phrase would say, is to like know, love, and serve God in this life so that we can be happy with him in the next. And so much of meaning in a religious context is about getting to the afterlife in the best possible state. And I think another big shift that I had to make is, well, if I can't make up for a lack of experience, if I can't make up for not fighting against injustice, if heaven isn't real, all we have is this life. And I think that makes this life so much more profound. If you knew you were moving to a state for the rest of your life, you'd probably take it slow. You might not experience as many things. You might not make that much of a difference in the community immediately. But if you know you were going somewhere for a week, you would live every day. I know, like on vacation, I'm up so much earlier than my daily life. When I'm on vacation, I'm researching and packing those days. I'm also being very careful to have like my set time to like relax. And so I'm very intentional about the 1 week I'm on vacation, but I'm not when I'm in my daily life or to the same extent. So I think also part of the shift is being okay with going, this is the only life that we have, so let's live it to the max. And I think it's especially on the queer issue is like, if we're rewarded in heaven for, if we don't get married in this life and we forego marriage, we forego kids, we forego living in a culture that supports us, like, even if we're wrong, like God will make up for it in heaven. It's like, no, like I want to love people in this life. I want to make this life a better place. And if there is injustice, especially against the queer community, I want to fight against that. And I think that if we take the Camus style of thought on like the absurdity of life, that we are humans on a rock flying through the galaxy, and that once we die, that's it. I tend to think like, yeah, so what are we going to do? We're like, let's entertain that question for a second. It's like, if the only life that I have is this one, what decisions am I going to make the world a better place? What decisions am I going to make my life the best possible thing that I can, and for the people around us? And I think there is more beauty in life when we have to be responsible for the decisions that we make. And when I was religious, the place that I went to ask big questions about life was the chapel. And now that I'm not religious, the place that I go in my mind when I'm trying to figure out what decisions I want to make is the last 2 weeks of my life. Like, I think to live well is to die at peace. And so when I think like, who is it that I want to be around? What sort of life decisions do I want to make? What sacrifices am I willing to make? I think like, what is going to allow me to die with peace and to go out with no regrets? And I think that's where the problem with hedonism, where Christians say without God, you're going to become a hedonist. And just, you're going to have the terrible life and you're just going to do drugs and all these crazy things. It's like, no. Like when I'm on my deathbed, I want to know that I have a spouse that loves me. I want to have kids around me. I want to have friends that I've sacrificed for. I want to still have my health in one piece. I want to live as long as I can. I also want to know that the world is a better place than I left it. I want to know that when I pass away, the world's slightly better than when I entered it. And I also, when it comes to a career, like I want to work and do fun things. But I also don't want to be a workaholic because I want to be able to pass away well. Like my ideal vision for a life that is meaningful is one that I am okay with leaving when it becomes my time.
What would you say to someone that listens to that and says, why should I care about anything that is going to happen here if at the end of the day, like a million years from now, it's not going to matter? how would you encourage someone, like, what would you say to someone that is thinking that, like, yes, I can care about my parents, I can care about my health, I can care about these things, but in a million years from now, none of that is probably going to matter, and I'm going to be forgotten, and the fear of oblivion, the fear of just like nothing really matters, so why even care? How would you address that?
First thing is, do you wish that previous generations cared less or more about a better future? Right?
Mm,
I think like, yes, that the principle of making the world a better place and living life, the only thing that I want history to do more of is to have cared more about the future. And I think especially for people that have kids, it's like, even if your kids don't have kids, you still want your kids to have a better future even when you're gone, regardless of religious persuasion or philosophical schools of thought. Like, even if your kids are the last generation, you want the best possible thing for your kids. And I think like there's so many things, and so much of why I do this work is like, I wish I'd had the content that I'm thinking through now when I was first becoming religious, so I could have not spent my years doing that. And I
absolutely.
care about that because there are people who have gone through it, and I wish somebody had been there. So why would I not be there for the people that are where I used to be? And yes, in billions of years, is the solar system going to die in a heat death? Sure. But does that mean that I don't want to treat my parents well at dinner tonight? Does it mean that I don't want to one day get a dog and get to experience it? I think in the same way, in the Christian context, when it comes to dogs, most Christians don't believe that dogs will go to heaven, but yet we still value our dogs' lives. And by them having shorter lives, we almost take a greater interest in them. We want to get them pup cups from the Starbucks. We want to go on crazy hikes. We want them to snuggle in bed with us. Like, just because billions of years from now there might be hypothetical extractions, it's like, so what are you going to do after listening to this podcast? And I don't think people are even capable of separating those two. Of like, a billion years from now, this won't matter. And nobody sits around after listening to a podcast and floats there. I think that when we let go of meaning, like I said, we get to start caring, and we get to start making decisions for a better future.
Something that really like gets to me is the understanding of the conscious experience and how that in itself matters, and how Cade was saying that one of the things that would be that he wishes that past generations would have done is to actually care more about the future and actually care more about what is going to happen to other generations. And I think what that reminds me of is the importance of just a conscious experience. And even if something isn't necessarily going to matter in a million years from now, in this understanding that we have of the word matter, you have a conscious experience and you experience pain, and we experience frustration, and we experience joy. So that kind of like empathy, understanding that other kinds of creatures and other humans also have that kind of conscious experience as well, and wanting to make it as free of suffering as possible, and wanting to make it as joyous and as happy as possible and just as meaningful as possible is in itself a kind of purpose and a kind of meaning, even if there's not like a transcendent meaning and a transcendent reason for why we do the things that we do. A simple understanding of my conscious experience, your conscious experience matters and is real. Like, this is something that you are experiencing. This is something that you are feeling. And these are chemicals that are going through your body. These are chemicals that you are experiencing. So regardless of whether it'll matter in a million years, it matters now, I feel like. And I think that's also an interesting approach to take. Just, it matters because for something to have meaning, it doesn't need to have a transcendent meaning, I guess. And I think that's a kind of, yeah, I think that's different than at least what I was taught growing up.
And it doesn't have to be extrinsically imposed. Like, I think an example of this is that in all of our friendships with people, there's inside jokes that we make, or habits that we have, or restaurants that we go to, that to the outside world, like going to When I'm back in Minnesota, one of my mentors when I was younger, we go to a specific cafe, and that's not externally imposed. It's meaningful, but it's not meaningful because somebody said that restaurant's important. It's because we'd go to breakfast there twice a week, every day every week when I was in high school.
Mm.
And it's meaningful because I feel like in many ways, that's the cafe that I grew up in. It brings me back to a time when I was trying to figure out who I was in the world. And so extrinsically imposed, let's say by God, doesn't mean that it's internally meaningful. And just because something's internally meaningful doesn't mean that it has to be grounded in this outside perspective. And I think in all of our relationships, there's little things that we do that we find immensely meaningful. And if you can grant that, then you can think, what are the internally motivated things that I want to make meaningful in this life that I have, instead of trying to spend all of our time trying to figure out what God wants. And to go back to our original analogy of like, life is like this road trip that God has given us. And it's like, road trips are fun because you go, hey, I want to spend more time here. Or like somebody at the local gas station was like, really, if you want to have a better experience, don't go to this tourist attraction. You should go off the beaten path to this one.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can go, let's double the trip. Or you can go, let's half the trip. Like a road trip I don't find meaningful if I'm sticking to the itinerary, especially if somebody else gave me the itinerary. That the beauty of a road trip, the beauty of an adventure, is that you get to determine what it is. And nobody would say a road trip or a journey is not beautiful or not meaningful because somebody else didn't write the rules. It's meaningful precisely because you made the itinerary and you choose how you want to spend the road trip.
Wow. Yeah. I hadn't thought about it like that. I haven't thought about it with that kind of analogy, but that is so true. And I think in a way it's encouraging because it shows that we are capable, even Christians who or religious folks who uphold to maybe a more objective kind of purpose and meaning. I think it shows that everyone is capable of finding meaning without something that's objective, like it's not something that's, it might be new to apply to this kind of like grander purpose and grander meaning question, but I think it's something that we all do to different degrees in different areas of our lives, just like that, or as you said, with having a dog or taking care of whatever it may be, anything that matters to you. And even though it might not be a kind of, again, transcendent meaning, we still apply meaning to things and we still live by those values and by that purpose and find that fulfillment and feel that fulfillment. And I think that also shows that God shaped hole in our hearts that we were told that we were going to have does not necessarily have to be there. Because religion does not own meaning, if that makes sense. Like, meaning existed before religion and meaning will exist after religion. And it doesn't have a monopoly on meaning, just as it doesn't have a monopoly on morality.
Another example that I like to think about is that I filter like a lot of my life lessons through ultra marathons, so between 100 and 200 miles. And on all of those courses, you could just drive to the finish line. I was helping a friend through a 250-mile race in Arizona, and you can just drive from the start to the end. And so it's like, if the only point of doing a race was to get to the end destination, then you could drive through. But what's the difference? And in an ultra marathon, the life lesson that I've learned and that people talk about is that as soon as you think about the finish line, you're quitting the game. As soon as you think about the finish line, it means that you are not present here. As soon as you think about the finish line and wanting to get it over with, that's when you start suffering. And so in an ultra marathon, you're out there and you have to stay present. You are talking about one foot in front of the other. You're enjoying the scenery. When things get difficult, you are relying on the people that are on the trail with you. And in many ways, you come into these aid stations every 10 or 20 miles, and you're hanging out for 10 minutes with people who are there feeding you, people that you care about that are there. And these are people both on the trails and at aid stations that I know I'll never see again. But it doesn't mean in that moment when I'm helping somebody in a race or when somebody's helping me during my race, it doesn't mean I can't appreciate this person. It doesn't mean that I can't be grateful for this person. It doesn't mean I have to be mean to this person. It doesn't mean that I don't have to care about this person. If there's something beautiful in seeing these people that I'll only ever see once, to enjoy their company, to enjoy the experience, and that even when things get difficult, and I think another thing that Christians talk about is like, without God, suffering is meaningless, or that you don't have a way through which you can look at suffering. And I think even in the moments when I'm in extreme pain after having ran for 24 hours, I know that once the race is over, I wish I was back where I was, even in the most difficult moments. And so all of these races, they're the experience. They're about the journey, as cliche as it sounds in life and in running and whatever field you're in, that like, it's not about the destination, it's about a journey. And when I think about the most meaningful experiences from the past few years are out on the trails, on hikes, with people that I care about, doing things that I found meaningful, things that make me better and make the world a better place. And that's what I remember. It's not the destination that I could have driven to. It's about the experience. And when you, especially in an ultra marathon or a hike, whatever it is, when you know a very definitive end, it does not mean the current moment is not meaningful. And in fact, by there being an end means that all we have is the present, and we take that and we are grateful for that. And so when we look at the expanse of life and we go, we're meat bags on a floating rock, it means like, so let's care about people. Let's care about what we have right now. Let's live this life to the max. Not in a hedonistic way, but in a way that we care about, where we can pass away knowing that we lived the best possible life with the fewest possible regrets, making the world the best possible place with people that we genuinely cared about and sacrificed for.
Huh. Yeah, I want to, before we like close off, I want to like touch a little bit on what you talked about of the meaning of suffering. Of there is suffering meaningless, and I think that is a very difficult question to wrestle with, because the idea of, is there a reason why these horrible things have happened and keep happening? Is there like a transcendent reason? I lean towards the side of like, transcendently, I don't think so, and that's very like difficult for many people to process, because in a way, these kinds of religious beliefs and these kinds of like a greater purpose and a greater meaning do help people. It can be like a safety net and help people find solace in their grief and find solace in their mourning, and then that all things will be made new, right? That Christ will make all things new again, that heaven's gonna be real, that there's a hope after this, and if that was all that religion was, then go for it, do your thing. I just know that's not the way that my brain works. I know, like, I would rather hear the truth and believe the truth than be comforted by a lie, or be comforted by, like, that's just like, that just wouldn't be comforting to me. And even like, for example, that's something that I've had to like navigate through personally. My mom died in an airplane accident when I was 7 years old, and I'm like, and I've heard people say, yeah, there's a reason for that, like God had a reason, like God this, or like, we don't know the reason, but everything happens for a reason. Honestly, like, I don't think that happened for a reason. I don't think there's a transcendent reason why my mom had to die, or why like different like things that have happened in my life had to happen. I just think that's the world that we live in. I think that's reality. I think that's just and Christians would say that's just living in a fallen world. I just think it's just living in a world that came about through the processes of, just specifically like evolution, natural selection, and I mean, just the way that the world was created, like that's just it. That's just the way that the world is, and I don't necessarily see a transcendent meaning to it. And honestly, I don't feel like I need to. Like, it's not necessarily like a more comforting thing for me. I think what's more comforting, and at least helps me in my everyday life, is just recognizing, hey, shit happens and there's not going to be a reason for it all the time. And what, what can I gain from this? How can I grow? How can I help others? Because I don't necessarily think there's like a transcendent meaning, and you can create meaning out of your suffering. You can create meaning out of pain, out of heartache. And I do think it's difficult because, in my case, there's people that, like, if I was someone else, I'd be like, oh yeah, of course, like, heaven is real. Like, I want to see my mom after I die and whatever. And I don't know what to say. Like, I mean, yes, I don't want to take people's comfort away, but that, at least that just doesn't work for me. And I just won't, I just don't feel comfort in something that I know isn't true. And I also think that's probably like a barrier when it comes to people accepting that there may not be a transcendent meaning, that there might not be an objective meaning, that this world just is what it is and we don't necessarily fully understand why. But that's a very scary thing. And I think you and I are very like logical and very like able to like think like that, and very like we can grapple through those things. And I think there's other people that really, really struggle to like accept the fact that there may not be any meaning, and that thought might just be too scary to even consider. And I think that might be why they just hang on to like, no, like God is real and like this religion is real, because if it's not, what that means is even more scary,
Yeah. I think from a philosophical lens, and this would be a different discussion, I think the only way that terrible tragedies not caused by other humans make sense is under naturalism. But that's a whole other rabbit hole. But I think on the interpersonal side, right, somebody dealing with this, I think like how do we respond to tragedy as people that might not believe in God? I'm reminded of one of my family members, and their best friend passed away very early in life from a particular cause. And to honor their legacy, my family member created a nonprofit to make sure that didn't have to happen again.
Mm.
And so I think when it comes to, there's bad things that happen. Absolutely. And I think part of it's like we have to accept that it's happening. And I think maybe an advantage of, let's say, the secular worldview is that when somebody's passing away of, let's say, a disease or a terrible tragedy that happened, we have to confront the fact that it happened because we don't have control over everything. And so I think a more practical step when we are so upset with the reality that's out there, that at some point we have to accept it, and not accept it in a passive way where we can let that just, it doesn't matter. But when we say, yeah, it matters, and so what are we going to do about it? When it comes to honoring family members' legacies after they've passed away, I find more comfort in the fact that they have made me into the person that I am. And I can pass that wisdom and that goodness onto the world, rather than God's giving them their rewards somewhere in some place. It's like, what action am I going to take now to honor that person's life? And I think that, like, after I pass, I don't want people spending years on end praying for the salvation of my soul and worrying about if I'm heaven or not. I want them to take action. Whatever money I have left over, whatever nuggets of wisdom I've had, whatever life that I've built, I want that to continue on for successive generations. And if it's some terrible tragedy, I want people to take action to make sure that doesn't happen again. And if it's peaceful and amazing, I want something about my life to be echoed throughout the ages. And so I think from a secular point of view, the very like practical step is to simply accept, and to truly accept what's happening, not fight against it, to not spend all of our time praying. I think especially in terminal diseases or terrible accidents, we can either spend our time praying, or we can spend our time making that person's life better. And sometimes for some people, praying does make their life better. But I'd rather say, let's make the best last few months that we have here, and not in all the people that I have pray for you. Let's have them show up and let's do something awesome. Let's make a good end to life instead of wishing that it wasn't the end to life. Because at some point we have to accept, and I think there is tremendous beauty in accepting, in radically accepting, and then deciding, so what are we going to do to care?
Mm, yeah. And that reminds me of, sort of comes back full circle of the one thing that we would have wished older generation or previous generations would have done is think more about the future. And I think what you're talking about, letting suffering, letting pain be a kind of catalyst to initiate change, to figure out how to avoid these things from happening in the future so that other people and future generations won't have to experience the same thing and won't have to experience that same pain, because we value that kind of consciousness, and we value the understanding that people experience pain, that we've experienced pain, and we don't want other people to experience that. And having, I think, our meaning be so attached, or having our meaning be attached to that kind of like empathy and collective consciousness and desire for change, and realizing that, yeah, if this world is all there is, let's make it meaningful. Let's make it a good place to live in for as many people as we can. And yeah,
I was going to say probably the final thing that I can add in here is, I believe it was Keanu Reeves who was asked, like, what do you think will happen after you die? And he takes like a good 10 seconds of silence, answers with, there's a lot of people who are going to miss me. And so the question, like, what happens after we die is that we've left something behind. And I think of my grandpa when he passed away. He passed away, and regardless of if there's another life or not, I know that the life lessons that he's taught to me and the way in which he's formed me into the person that I am today, part of him lives on in me. And so when we pass away, it's not to say that we have to be the greatest sultan on earth, or that we have to be the greatest philosophical influencer, or we have to be the next huge person. I'm okay with, at the end of my lifetime, knowing that I made the world a better place, knowing that I lived life without regrets, and knowing that something about me is going to live on. And I also think from like another practical lens, when we realize that when we die, nothing technically matters, frees us to take risks on ourselves, frees us to make decisions for ourselves. Because it's like, oh, should I go out with this person or that person? If that's not going to matter in 500 years, but it is going to matter now. So instead of listening to my family, or instead of listening to the self-help books out there, or listening to what society thinks is going to judge us for, we go, none of this will matter in a few hundred years. So I'm going to make decisions that work for me. I'm going to cut off the societal restraints around what I should and shouldn't do. I'm going to leave behind these things that don't serve me and live life on my own terms, making the world a better place and making my life a better place, and having to really think about this. And maybe the last analogy is like, I think that meaning is like, we look, and this is very like Jordan Peterson type of thought, that it's like life is just like a forest of physical things, but yet we have to move through it. And there's two, I think, paths to be ahead of us. One is there is a super highway down the middle of the forest. They have clear cut the forest. They have told us exactly there's a highway, and we can go 100 miles an hour down the forest and get to the destination. And I think in many ways, that's like the prepackaged meaning that religion offers to us. It tells us what's meaningful, what we should care about, what things we should and shouldn't do. It's telling us where we're going. Or would I rather go on a hike? Would I rather enjoy the forest? Would I rather invite people to come hike with me? And it doesn't matter if I go 1,000 miles, because I'd rather spend time with my friends, making decisions, exploring things, and finding beauty in the forest than I would go down the clear-cut path. Right. And I don't think there's a right decision to make, but just realize, like, when meaning provides you these easy shortcuts, religion provides you these easy shortcuts to what they say is meaningful. And yes, without religion, you have to make determinations. Without religions, you have to think. Without religions, you have to envision a better world. Without religions, you have to figure out who you care about and what you care about. Right. And I would rather spend my time in the beautiful forest with people I care about, camping and hiking and enjoying things and getting to do life that way than being stuck on a bus going through the forest at 100 miles an hour.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You are like so full of like amazing analogies. Like, oh my God. Yeah. And I, yeah. And I think if, there's anyone watching that or listening to this that is in that kind of, you know, between like a rock and a hard place of, I want to leave, but I also don't want to lose this kind of meaning. And I think there is a process, at least there was for me, where it is sitting with that loss of like objective morality and like, or not morality, objective meaning and objective purpose. I used to think, yeah, my purpose is to know God and to make him known, and thinking that's like the objective purpose of mankind. And it, I think it is good to take time to sit with the grief of losing what you thought was your purpose and what you thought was your meaning and what you thought was what truly mattered, and recognizing that that hurts, and that's like losing a part of yourself, and giving yourself permission to feel that, and at the same time being able to know that you have the power to build that meaning for yourself after, and that it's not, again, that meaning was never monopolized by religion. That meaning can exist outside of this belief system. And I think it takes time, but I think that listening to stories like yours and listening to stories like mine can give people that hope that, I guess life without God isn't totally meaningless, So,
Well, it's like in that analogy, in religion, as you're deconstructing, it's like your car breaks down. You have been moving through the forest so fast, so efficiently in this vehicle that was given to you, and it breaks down. And there is that grief process in the first few months after leaving. You're like, I don't have these rigid structures. I don't have this thing imbued. But also, I got camping gear in my car. I have people that I care about who are also in my car. And what if instead of driving in circles at 100 miles an hour until the end of our life, what if we went on an adventure? And yes, getting used to camping might be difficult. Your legs might be sore on the first day. But would you rather spend the rest of your life trying to figure out and go as fast as you can down the highway with people you don't care about and
yeah,
people who objectively do not care about you? Or would you rather get off of the road, pick up your camping gear, and go on a beautiful adventure with people that actually support you? And it's not an easy transition, but in many ways, people want to break out of the 9 to 5. They want to break out of corporate America. I think of religion like that. You have your clock in, you have your clock out, you have everything's told for you. What if you got to build a beautiful career? What if you got to design your life? What if you got to figure out who you want in your life and people that actually care about you? I think that's the decision. Do you want to keep trying to, especially as you're deconverting, try to fix your car on the side of the road for forever and spend the rest of your time trying to scrutinize the parts? Or do you want to go on an adventure, go through the hard stuff, and build a beautiful life and see some beautiful things? Because I know so many people in deconstruction, I want to be so careful with this, that it took me time when I was deconstructing. I was on the side of the road trying to get the pieces back together so I could drive and be with all the other Christians. And then I was like, or I could see what's out there, and maybe I come back to the car at some point. But in the
yeah,
meantime, I'm on a beautiful adventure that I find meaningful now. And I think that my life has had more meaning when I get to decide it. I think my
absolutely.
life has had more meaning when I get to pick who's in it. I think my life has more meaning when I get to draw a vision for the future. And I think my life has become more beautiful without the idea of the afterlife being taken for granted.
Oh, yes, 100%. And that's what I was going to say. I think that after leaving religion, I have found my life to be way more meaningful, way more like in a different way, obviously, in a different way, but more meaningful because, as you said, things matter more. Like things on this earth matter more. People on this earth matter, and our experiences matter. And it just, I think I think I genuinely had more existential dread as a Christian than like not as a Christian. And I think I have experienced a deeper sense of meaning and also more personal meaning and more fulfilling meaning um, after my deconstruction, for sure.
I find it, like I said, with ultra marathons as an example, that the people in my life, I feel like I'm in an aid station where there's people around me that love me and support and care about me. And I want to see them at the next aid station. I want to see them back out on the trail. But I'm also okay knowing that people pass away. People
Mm,
leave lives, people move away, people pass away, people move on to bigger and better things. And I think there's something, I think of this life as we're inside of this tent where there's a storm raging outside, and we just get to enjoy the present moment. And then we get to sojourn back out there into the difficulties of everything, and there will be another aid station, and we're going to meet people along the way. And there's going to be people that go ahead, there's going to be people that drop out, there's going to be people that you're going to see later down the road. But all that we have right now is to smile and to be grateful with the people around us and to keep on living our lives and to keep on journeying, because there are some beautiful things to see out there in the world, but we have to get back out there to do it.
mm, mm. I think that is a perfect way to conclude the conversation. I don't know if there's anything else that you want to say, but one of the things that I learned from you is that I should go on more hikes, run more marathons, and go camping more.
Yes, that is. I joke that I'm now an evangelist for running in many ways. I like to filter a lot of like my life lessons through that, but there are so many other wonderful groups out there that do different things. But that's just kind of analogies that I personally think through.
I love that. I love that so much. Well, Kate, thank you so much for joining me today and for being a part of this conversation and for sharing your thoughts and being vulnerable and being honest and doing something that is meaningful. So
Yeah.
I appreciate it a ton. And is there anything else that you want to say before we head out?
Not that I can think of other than all we have is today. So smile.
Let's go. And also remember to I'll link your social media and ways that people can connect with you and find you. So please be sure to check Cade's pages out. He makes so much like great content that has been so helpful to me, and I know has been so helpful to so many other people. So thank you so much, and we will see you next time. Take care.